When considering legendary animation, a few projects might come to your mind. For a lot of us, our thoughts rush straight to Disney. Bolstering almost a century atop the animation game, Disney has an incredibly impressive catalog of animated projects. But to others who may have not grown up on Disney and Western animation, Japanese anime had their back, with iconic pieces of art stretching from shonen series like Hunter x Hunter to seinen anime like Monster. And let's not overlook the motion pictures they've produced, with the most famous titles coming from, do I really have to say it? Like, come on, everyone and their mothers knows Studio Ghibli at this point. But it's not just limited to the world of Ghibli. There's a rich catalog of vintage and modern anime movies that can be categorized as legendary. I'm getting a little off topic here, but the point of the winding intro was to segue towards the main character of this video. You can't say the words legendary animation without mentioning 1988's Akira.
Ser um grande herói das estradas, tudo que você queria ser.
The ethereal figure that is 1988's Akira has become stuff of legend, being attributed as the first real piece of Japanese animation to make waves in the Western world, shifting the global perception of what animation can be, and making sure everyone knows that the medium can be used for much more than just keeping your kids entertained. Akira was cultivated in such a meticulous agar that I'm forced to affirm that fate most definitely favors the bold. With Japan's economy going through a boom in the late 80s named the Japanese Economic Miracle, it granted the Akira Committee with one of the highest production budgets for an animated feature at the time, 1.1 billion Japanese yen, or about 10 million US dollars. This financial freedom was granted to none other than the incredibly precise and rigorous creator of the Akira manga, Katsuhiro Otomo, assuring that the utmost care would be taken in delivering nothing short of a timeless masterpiece. In its tireless 3 years of production, Otomo set out to shatter the ceiling of what was possible in animation. Being fearless in his approach and confident in his team, Akira's production became famous for incorporating revolutionary techniques such as pre-scoring, the quick action recorder, the synclavier, CGI, an almost infinite color palette, a highly experimental musical score, and just an abundance of blood, sweat, and tears to glue it all together. But there was one bump in the road that had to be dealt with before any of this innovative production could begin. Because when Akira was commissioned, the manga had yet to be completed. There was no ending. Otomo was roughly on chapter 87 of the total 120 that would come to be, about 3/4 of the way through, so not far off. And indeed, this would present a unique challenge to Otomo, because not only did he need to think of an original ending, as not to ruin anything for manga readers for the comic's eventual ending, but he had already decided that he wanted the story to stand on its own to an extent, but still tie into his original manga. Early on, he was even thinking of making a completely separate world for the movie based on the comic, but decided against it. So naturally he chose to begin pre-production by tackling the biggest issue, writing the ending, which he mentions was obviously a very difficult task. I stress this point regarding the narrative and ending because, well, that's the crux of this video. Because for all the amazing effort that went into the sound design, voice acting, animation, etc., Otomo's focus for the film was very much on the audio-visual aspects of this project. He knew that he only had a 2-hour runtime, that there would have to be a lot of cuts. And this, on top of writing a new ending, his goal from the very start became clear. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, and neither am I saying Akira is a narrative nightmare. Listen closely, nerds. I'm not here to shit on Akira. I happen to love it. But, if you were like me having grown up watching anime and finding out that this, Akira, was what walked so the rest of the industry could run, and that it's heralded as such a titan of the genre to this day. So, you took the time out, sat down, and watched it for the first time. You got transfixed and almost overloaded by what you were seeing, not comprehending how they could possibly achieve this in bloody 1988. But once the credits began to roll, you were left feeling like an absent-minded toddler. Well, join the club, and don't be embarrassed by those snooty art house redditors, because I'm here to tell you exactly why Akira doesn't make sense. Let's do a little backstory on the coming about of the original manga, just because I find it interesting, no other reason. Birthed in 1982, Akira was first serialized in Young Magazine by talented mangaka Katsuhiro Otomo. Coming off the success of previous sci-fi works of similar taste, Fireball and Domu, Otomo was asked by one of the magazine's editors to write a serial for them that was sci-fi action. His reply, why not? As was a running theme for his works, he decided to base Akira softly off of Mitsuteru Yokoyama's Tetsujin 28 Go. This initial inspiration then spiraled much further than expected and naturally became what the world knows now as Akira, with homages to Tetsujin 28 Go still present, such as Kanada's character name and Akira being test subject number 28. I'm about to give a bit of a lowdown of what the Akira manga and film stories are about, as it has a big part to play when unpackaging why the film's narrative is confusing. So of course, obvious spoilers for both pieces of material. Now, just like any adaptation, there's a ton of minor differences between the film and source material, which I won't bother to go into. I just want to highlight major differences which then had a resulting effect on the film. So I'm going to go ahead and assume you've all seen the film, but might not have read the manga. Also, if you are interested in a more detailed comparison, Dino Junkie has a great video going through them. Link in the description. Alright, let's do this. Both begin with an unexplained detonation and a time skip to set the stage for the unfolding narrative to take place in the cyberpunk setting of Neo Tokyo. In both, we are introduced to our adolescent biker gang members, namely Tetsuo and Kaneda, where we see the initial bubblings of attention arising between the two. Whilst the gang are out and about fighting their rivals the clowns, Tetsuo gets bashed up by a little old baby boy named Takashi and starts to develop psychic powers. Now, the events that follow in the manga after this shadow the same overarching narrative as the film, but this segment of narrative in the manga involves a much greater level of detail and time spent with our characters. Tetsuo still ends up at the Olympic construction site in search of Akira, but goes through a few more hurdles before getting there. And the same goes for Kaneda, Kei, the Colonel, and every other major and side character in the story. For example, Tetsuo has a whole spiel of becoming the leader of the clown gang, which naturally butt heads with Kaneda and Co., resulting in a more graphic loss of a close friend. Things like this, which add depth, tension, and turmoil to our characters and story, had to be omitted from the film, and Otomo knew full well this was unavoidable. Cuts were necessary to fit the runtime. Even then, till this point in the story, narratively it's still very solid, and the only downfall being that the characters are still slightly alien to us, and that comes down to the fault of Otomo. He just had to go and make a manga that was unbelievably detailed, not only in its artwork, but its plethora of interesting and three-dimensional characters that inhabited his visceral cyberpunk future setting of Neo Tokyo. Like, come on. What a moron. But for real, talk about an impossible task in giving each major character enough screen time to allow for the audience to get to know them. A handful of major manga characters had their presence leaned down or completely cut out. And a huge round of applause to Otomo achieving the result that he did, but that's not without saying it still leaves more to be desired. Now, the events that take place after Tetsuo arrives at the stadium are where the narratives of the film and manga really begin to diverge. So from this point onwards, not only do we have major scene cuts and loss of character development, but we also have significant differences in plot events. In the manga, Akira is physically introduced. Yes, the little boy whose name is in the title steps into the world after Tetsuo releases him from his cryo chamber. Then, he stretches a little, sorts out his bedhead, and just casually levels Neo Tokyo again. And no, this isn't like the one at the end of the movie. This happens after Akira tragically loses his close friend Takashi, who catches a bullet originally meant for him. The largest cut that took place when transforming Akira for the adaptation was the omission of Akira himself. all his actions, interactions, motivations, basically anything that fleshed his character out more, but instead was summed up by the image of him representing pure energy and his desire to protect his friends. Which, okay, fair enough. That is a pretty darn good job considering how little he was in the film. But this notion is far more impactful if you already know what kind of person he is. The fact that after Akira loses his friend, he turns cold and robotic, and once he gets their support back, he uses his powers to not only stop, but help Tetsuo in the finale. But for many viewers of just the film, he still feels very mysterious. Now, I can't say for sure whether Otomo had an ending planned for his manga well in advance, or if the ending he had to formulate for the anime informed it. Considering the similarities between the two, I would hazard a guess that there was some collusion amongst the ideas. Only when comparing the two you can see the similarities in the themes of energy, rebirth, and redemption. Instead, when watching the film, it all comes hurling at you in the final act, leaving you with your jaw on the floor and your brain in a fog. The manga is 120 chapters collected into 6 tankobon volumes. The movie covers roughly 3/5 of the overall content, if I'm being generous, adapted prominently from the first 2 and a bit volumes along with the ending of the last volume. And of course, Katsuhiro Otomo took it upon himself to make this executive decision as he painstakingly storyboarded the entire anime in great detail before production began. So, who better to explain the project's main goals and shortcomings than Mr. Otomo himself? Otomo is a man who believes solemnly in the idea of artistic expression and variance. When chanced with this unique opportunity, it never occurred to him to play it safe and just give the fans his manga in flipbook format. He knew that if there was something special, new, and revolutionary to be created, that it had to set itself free of the shackles of the current anime industry. For it to be a success in his eyes, the anime would have to stand on its own 2 feet, separate from its precursor. And rest assured, Mr. Katsuhiro Otomo can sleep peacefully knowing that fans like me are evidence to his success. Even when relinquishing the rights for a live-action movie to Warner Bros., he seemed to detach himself from it with ease. He accepted that Akira is not his anymore. It should be free to expand itself further in any way it seems fit. To hammer my point down on Otomo's primary goal for this feature, I'd like to quote the man himself when asked about the difficulties of animating Akira. He made sure to impress the ideal that Akira is not really a character piece, that he wanted to create this movie as more of a total visual piece. Evidence to this is in his own reaction on watching the movie for the first time, and I quote, "Actually, when I saw the first rush of the movie version of Akira, I thought it would be a failure. I left the theater very quickly and came back home to tell my wife that the movie was a failure. This was because I thought the first half was good, but because the time and budget were limited with so many cuts, the quality dropped as the story developed. In general, I thought the picture quality and cut quality went down when the movie went into the later half. So, when I saw the movie's quality decline as I watched, it made me feel miserable." Notice how he mentions the decline into the second half of the film, and how he is laser focused on the visual details rather than the story. This is clearly a common ailment among most artists when judging their own work, as evidently Akira was far from a failure, but it does allow us to plainly see what Otomo's eye for the project was. There's heated discourse to this day, where viewers are split by the film's understanding, with some being completely lost and disgruntled at the contrived plot, whilst others greatly appreciate the scarcity of exposition. I'm a bit of a fence-sitter on this particular dialogue, as you may be able to tell by now. To sum it up, if you want a great narrative that is underlined with the trauma of war, corruption, rebellion, existentialism, rebirth, go and read the manga. If you want to see how Japanese anime made Western animation look like my high school claymation project, you watch the feature film. They serve a different purpose in my eyes, and I feel in the creators too. The idea of this video actually came about because I recently watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which ended up taking me down a bit of a dystopian rabbit hole, causing me to rewatch classics like Blade Runner and Akira. FYI, my last video was an essay on Cyberpunk Edgerunners, so if you're a fan of that show and the genre, give it a watch. Let me know what you think. Lots of love to all of you who made it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Plenty more content coming your way this year, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, appreciate you watching.